And hello, good afternoon, everyone. Happy Friday, everyone. Welcome to Get a Grip with Coach Elix. I am your host, Coach Elix, and with me today, two amazing humans. One of them happens to be my husband. Hello.
Hello, this is Stephen, the medium.
That's right. And the other one, not my husband. You are? You want to tell people who
He's
you
your
are?
backup in case something happens to
he's
me.
he's just looking pretty today. It's like,
Good afternoon, one and all. I am Mark.
the producer.
I am the producer, yes.
Yes.
I think I'm the boss, but I'm not.
wow.
I admit it.
Can't argue with that.
I don't know about that. I'll let you
But-
and Steven decide that one.
If anything technical goes on,
You're the boss.
yeah.
You're the boss.
Blame me.
Yeah.
So happy to be here. We've been absent for the last couple of weeks. First week because Mark was sick. So we wanted to make sure that everyone was saved. This is a small space for those of you watching us on the live stream. So if one of us is sick, likely all of us will get sick. So we wanted to be safe for the sake of everyone here, especially in the studio. And then last week, for those of you who follow us on social media, you know that we've been grieving the loss of our beloved pet monkey. Memphis was his name, but we called him Monkey because he looked like a monkey. And he had been sick and for a little while. And the last month, he was in hospice care with us. And he passed last Thursday. And Stephen and I have been, heartbroken, devastated. And I don't want to talk a lot about it because I'm not going to be able to do the show if I keep talking about it. But I want to say thank you to everyone for your kindness, for your words, for your emails, for your calls. It's meant more to us than you can ever imagine. So thank you. And moving along, because again, we have to. Otherwise, this is going to be a subbing conversation today. I'm so excited because today I have an awesome guest, Dr. Jeffrey Hall. And we are going to be talking about leadership, and specifically, he wants to talk about why everything you know about leadership is wrong. How about that? What do you think about that?
I think that's a really interesting statement, and it just brings your curiosity to the table to want to hear what does that mean.
Yeah, I'm very curious to hear his perspective on what that means. When you think about leadership, how do you define leadership for you?
You talking to me?
Yeah, if I'm looking at you, that would be you, Stephen.
I just pulled out my Rhode Island mafia. Like, you talking to me?
Yeah, Stephen is never short of words, by the way, for those of you who know him.
Well, you were staring straight ahead. I thought you were talking to Mark.
I was staring just at him, Mark, just saying.
Well, I think for me it is. I think that the definition for me can change depending on what situation. I think you could have like a moving company, movers coming, and one person being the lead and the leadership of that. And then I think it could be when you look at animals and you have either the alpha who's leading that pack. I think it just changes, but I think the I guess it really depends on whether you're a good leader or a bad leader. So there's so much with that statement.
Absolutely. And for me, I go to, a leader or leadership for me, first of all, a leader is somebody. I would define a leader as somebody who creates the opening so that those who are working with her, for him, are the best self, are being their best self. He creates that opening. And leadership is about it's about being your best self, and leadership is about creating that opening. And I think in business, a lot of people confuse leadership with management. and they're two different things. A manager is not necessarily a leader, in my opinion. And I think often people think of, well, I'm a manager, therefore I am the leader. You may be a manager, but not necessarily a leader or an effective leader for that matter. You know what I mean?
I do.
So I also think about, COVID, right? And how has COVID impacted, the way we see leadership, the way in which we see the world today, and oftentimes now leaders have to learn to adapt because we are not, for the most part, we're not necessarily interacting in the same ways we used to interact before, and we had no choice but to learn to adapt to the new situation, to the new environment. A lot of us are, running our business via Zoom. So I'm really curious to see what Jeff has to say about all of this and how, how he defines, leadership and why he feels that everything that we've been taught about leadership is all wrong. So how about you, Mark? How do you see leadership?
Well, it's kind of, I've been a sort of leader, if you want to call it that. In my bowling days, I was the president of a few leagues that I bowled in. And the league as a whole, everything's fine when everything's running good, and but if there's a problem, then they come to the leader, and it would be my job to find what's the best solution that's fair for everybody. I can't take a side one way or the other. To me, a good leader is somebody who looks at the entire situation and comes up with maybe not the most popular solution, but at least all of the sides were taken into consideration.
Yeah.
Like you said, they're not a boss. You're not the boss. It's not my word is law. With something like that, when you have a group of people, it's a consortium of ideas and thoughts. And
yeah, Mark, you make a great point because one of the things, I actually talked to Jeff about this, when people hear, oh, we're going to talk about leadership, some people may say, oh, well, that's not for me because I'm not a leader. I'm not an executive. I don't work for a big company. I'm not in a position where others, I have to manage others. And your point is really well taken because I actually believe that this conversation is for everyone. So whoever you are, whatever it is that you're doing, you could be a stay-at-home mom. You could be someone who works in the local market. You could be somebody who's leading teams in corporate America, or you be one of those high-level executives, high-performing executives. Wherever you are, this conversation, I promise, it's going to be of value to you. So, your point is well taken because you correlate leadership to being part of the bowling team. And I actually think that we have the ability to be leaders every day in everything that we do. And that's how I view myself in that way. I wake up and I find myself being a leader, not necessarily doing. And that's also a good distinction. Leadership is not not necessarily the way I see it about the doing, but who you're being in the matter.
Well, you equate things like this to sports all the time.
Yes.
So it would be like a coach of a little league team. You're not the boss. You're not the boss of the kids. Your job is to teach them the fundamentals and to be more of a leader from what to do right, what's wrong, how to improve your skills. It's not like you've seen it. Some sports teams, their coaches or managers or whatever crack the whip, and people resent being treated like that.
Absolutely. Now, in years past, there was a belief that to be a leader, the one and most important requirement was that you be smart, that you have a high IQ. And that was a belief that was held for the longest time. And then we began to learn about emotional intelligence. And emotional intelligence, or what it's called EQ, there's a lot of research that demonstrates that actually the most effective leaders, there may be smart, but smart is not the number one qualifier, what makes them the most effective. They actually have very high levels of emotional intelligence. And emotional intelligence, is defined in four major components. It's about really understanding, having self-awareness, understanding what's going on with yourself, being able to regulate that self-awareness, being able to understand what's going on with others, and then regulate those social interactions. Now, when we come back, we're about to take a break. When we come back, I am going to have Dr. Jeffrey Hall join us, just to give you a little perspective about him. He's a psychologist, he's a leadership coach, he's a researcher, Harvard faculty member, and the author of Flex. Those of you watching in the live stream, Flex is his brand new book, The Art and Leadership in a Changing World. So you want to tune in. If you have questions and you want to ask questions directly to Jeff, you can call 508-222-1320. But this is a conversation about leadership and why everything that you know about leadership is wrong. So we will be right back. And hello and welcome back to Get a Grip with Coach Elix. This is your host, Coach Elix, and I am so excited because I have an amazing guest coming up. He's Jeffrey Hall. There's so much I can tell you about Dr. Hall. He's the Director of Education and Business Development at the Institute of Coaching, which is McLean Hospital and Harvard Medical School affiliate. I happen to be a fellow. By the way, a shout out to all those wonderful fellows, pun intended, who are listening to today's show. He's the CEO and founder of Leadership, a management consultancy based in New York City. He's a clinical instructor in psychology at Harvard Medical School and the author of Flex, the art and science of leadership in a changing world. And perhaps most importantly, he is my friend and someone I consider a mentor. Welcome, Jeffrey Hall. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
Did I do you proud?
Of course. Always do.
So here we are. Let's jump right in. Question.
Sounds good.
Why is everything we know about leadership wrong?
Well, that's because everything that most people think about leadership is based on an outdated story, an outdated meme that is related to the idea that leadership is about being charismatic and powerful and authoritative and having a extroverted personality and being, it's all about someone sort of rising to the top of the pyramid and looking down and crafting a vision, and all of which is completely outdated.
Now, in your recent book that you released in 2019, the Flex, the art and science of leadership in a changing world, you talked about the shift of the landscape of leadership, but you refer to that shift as a quiet revolution. Can you say more about that?
Well, yeah, the reason I call it a quiet revolution is that there's a fundamental change taking place across the world in who's rising to be a leader, to be influential, to have impact, to make a difference. And they're not getting necessarily a lot of media attention, because of all the things with the pandemic and the politics. But as organizations change and become more flat and networked and democratic, the folks that I'm seeing as an executive coach are becoming leaders in a whole big range of colors and types and cultures and backgrounds. So, the whole environment for leadership has changed dramatically. I'm seeing more women. I'm seeing more people of color. I'm seeing more people from different countries with different multicultural backgrounds. I'm seeing more LGBTQ folks enter into leadership roles. So this is all happening in real time. And it's what I wanted to share in my book by having a whole range of case studies of leaders that I've worked with that don't follow what I would call sort of the stereotypical, rising, white male, charismatic, patriarchal leader. Not that we have anything against white men. I mean, they're still very powerful and important, and they can make a difference and be great leaders. But it's time for us to realize that there's a whole different type of leader that's emerging on the organizational landscape that's really stirring and changing the way things work.
Now, I know that less than a year after you published Flex in 2019, the coronavirus happened, COVID happened,
Right.
And it altered everything. It was like a worldwide interruption. How do you think leaders can reset for growth beyond COVID?
Well, it's a very unfortunate situation, obviously, with a lot of people, getting sick and thousands of people dying. And, this is a very serious issue. And so I don't want to make light of it in any way because I feel a lot of empathy for people that have had to deal with their business being disrupted or someone in their family being ill. But I will point to a silver lining in the theme of leadership, which is that leaders have had to step back and start to pay attention to the kinds of things that we coaches were already focused on, which was creating an environment where people can share their full selves. You know, now that we're virtual, it becomes even more important to look for ways to create social cohesion, for people to be able to work and feel safe and connect and be able to share their anxieties. And so I think that there's been a focus for most leaders on becoming a little bit more vulnerable, becoming a little more empathetic, becoming more focused on collaborative communication, making sure everybody participates, making sure all the voices get heard, all of which is actually kind of a silver lining. You know, I'll give you one quick example. You know, I was in a team meeting with a client the other day, and it's all virtual now. And after we met on Zoom, where there were about 12 folks in little boxes on the screen, you know, a couple of them reached out to me afterwards, and they said, you know, Jeff, I actually really enjoyed being in a team meeting virtually, because when we used to meet in person, the boss would take up all the room, and sometimes I wouldn't even say anything. You know, it was like this power game to see who could speak up and who could take up more room. And he said, you know, when you were facilitating the meeting on Zoom, we went around the room and everybody got a chance to speak, and everybody took the time to listen to each other. He said it was actually more equal and more fair and fun, in some ways actually more safe. And I said, would you mind if I shared that with the boss? Because I want him to feel like you really were attended to, you really felt heard. And he said, sure, just tell him to start doing that when we meet in person.
You know, and you speak to that. That's part of the shift. We now are confronted with we're no longer meeting in person for the most part. So now we have Zoom meetings, and a lot of people jump to the conclusion that that may not be as effective or as positive. And what you're saying is it actually can be just as effective, and it actually can be a transformative effect on the community.
Yeah, I mean, I think there'll always be benefits to being able to connect in person. I mean, I don't think you can ever replicate the kind of, you know, water cooler conversations or being able to get together and have a barbecue with your colleagues. I mean, that's always going to be the best situation. But, you know, we have to make the most of what we have. And right now, what I'm seeing is that the leaders are the most effective are actually taking the extra time to reflect on how to create an environment virtually where people feel connected, where people do share what's going on in their lives, where people do feel like they can share a little bit about their home life and they can share a little bit about their fears and anxieties. So the leaders that are stepping up are more empathetic, they're more connecting, they're more collaborative than perhaps they would have been in the past. There's just been a little, I would call it an opening for connectivity and for relationships and for the emotional part of being connected as a team that's just so much more important than it was pre-COVID. And I'm hoping maybe we'll never go back, that the best leaders, the kind that I'm talking about that are emerging on the landscape, will continue to do those kinds of things even when they're back in the office.
And Jeffrey, what would you say to somebody who's listening and saying, well, I'm not a leader. I don't work for a company. I don't lead teams. You know, what can I gain from this conversation? What would you say? What value would they gain from your book, for example?
Well, first of all, I would ask them to step back and reflect on whether that's even true, that they're not a leader. The primary focus of my book was really to explode this myth that only the people that rise to the top of a big organization are leaders. I think that we all have within us the potential, the capacity, the creativity, and the possibility of leading. And all we have to do is look at examples of millennials and sometimes even younger folks, Generation Z, that are starting to create nonprofits and all sorts of startup organizations. And they're doing it through the internet. They're doing it through social media. They're doing it in very creative, innovative ways that don't fit the old mold. And that's the wave of the future. You don't have to run a big company in order to be a leader. You can start a business or a nonprofit or a service-oriented, community-based organization right from your computer. I have a client that works out of San Francisco, and her team is actually in New Zealand. And they're all in their early 20s, and they're doing incredible advocacy and nonprofit work. And, they're not following the traditional mold. They're global, they're interconnected, they're working like a, international multicultural team. And I don't think they're following any of the traditional, ladder climbing, hierarchical approaches to leadership. So I would say anyone that doesn't think of themselves as a leader, but can step up and be involved with their community, with nonprofits, anywhere where you're out doing good work in the world, you're probably more of a leader than you even realize.
That is so very true. You do a lot of coaching for frontline healthcare workers, which is actually very close to my heart because I do a lot of work in healthcare. I was a healthcare executive for over 15 years. And you recently wrote a blog on, the things that you've learned about leadership from this group. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, I think that, the folks that are at the front line of the response to the pandemic have just been extraordinary. And they continue to be extraordinary because it's not over by any means. And they have just taught us so much about what does it mean to bring in to the world where you operate, whether you're in a hospital or in a software company or in a nonprofit, wherever you are, to bring in a sense of compassion, empathy, curiosity, listening, connection, to really take the time to pay attention to helping others and within yourself to build resilience and to really have practices that are focused on getting the best out of everyone. And I've just seen this in real time with some of my clients that are running emergency rooms, running intensive care units. They're just such an extraordinary human beings, and they're not what you would call traditional, authoritative, bossy leaders. They are team-oriented. They're collaborative. They're empathetic, and they're not just doing that with their patients. They're doing it with each other. So for me, they're my role models.
I couldn't agree with you more. Listen, Jeff, we want to hear more about what you got to say, but I have to take a break. So would you hang in there with us?
Absolutely.
And for those of you listening, you're welcome to call us, 508-222-1320, and we will be right back. And welcome back to Get a Grip with Coach Elix. I'm your host, Coach Elix, and we are having a conversation with Dr. Jeffrey Hall, author of Flex, The Art and Science of Leadership in a Changing World, and a friend and a mentor of mine. So welcome back, Jeff.
Thank you.
By the way, I meant to say at the beginning that I'm joined by two very handsome co-hosts. One of them happens to be my husband. You've heard plenty about him, by the way. Stephen the Medium is here with me.
Hello, Jeff.
Great.
How are you?
I'm great. Nice to talk to you.
And nice to talk to you, too.
By the way, Stephen, I'm going to talk a little bit about this in a few minutes, but Stephen cannot wait for the conference in February so that he can hang out with us. Just saying, he's already booked his own trip, to join us, whether we invite him or not. Just saying. And but our producer Mark is also here with us, and he actually had a very interesting question during the break, and
Sure.
I thought, you know what, that's a question you should be asking Jeffrey. So go ahead, Mark.
Good afternoon, Dr. Hall.
Hi.
Hi. My question was, if you tend to be like an authoritarian type of person at home, and you're a leader maybe in business, does how you act at home, being a big authority figure, is that how you would tend to be as a leader in your job per se? Or can you just turn it off and be different between home and a business environment per se?
That's such a great question. Well, first I would say I think the days of being two different people, one at home and one at work, are coming rapidly to an end if they're not already over. Working in the virtual world has brought everyone's home into the office, and probably the most effective leaders have learned how to integrate themselves and their workplaces so that people can be the same person at home. They can bring their whole self to work. But to your question about whether or not, if you're an authoritative type leader, you would be the same way at home as you are at work, I think is the heart of coaching, really, because I work with a lot of authoritative leaders, and there are definitely times when you need to be authoritative. You need to be directive. You need to be decisive. At the very beginning of this pandemic, some of my best clients were incredibly authoritative. Even some of the healthcare workers, they needed to set in protocols. They needed to change the way they operated. They needed to calm down a very anxious team that they were working with. So there's definitely a time and a place for authoritative leadership. But the key today is to recognize the need to flex, which is why it's the key theme of my book, which you can actually either have a coach or do your own self-coaching if you start to recognize the need to change how you show up in different environments. So I'm sure those of you that listening, their authoritative style, your spouse may not appreciate it if you bring your authoritative style into the home. And you've probably learned how to tone it down a bit and maybe even listen to your spouse or listen to your kids. And that's a really good example. It kind of works both ways. So learning how to be more flexible and knowing when to be authoritative and when to be more of a curious, collaborative listener is one of the keys, I think, to being successful in today's world. So it's a great question.
Oh, thank you. That's very interesting. I'm the type of person when I was working where I worked the best when you lay the work out for me, tell me what you want to be done, leave me alone, let me do it. If I have a problem, I'll come to you. The boss that would breathe down my neck and really, I could never do exactly to my top performance, I thought, which is why, working overnight, I loved working overnight because there was nobody around, and as long as the work was done in the morning, things were cool.
Right.
So we will add marriage counselor to your list of professional achievements as well, because that was quite a good tip for relationships. Now, one of the I know you through the Institute of Coaching, McLean Hospital and Harvard Medical affiliate. And I know you're incredibly involved with the Institute. And the Institute is an organization that supports coaching practices that are being based in science. What is the science that supports the flexible leader behind most effective style of leadership?
Oh, there's a lot of studies. I'll just point to one that relates to what your producer just pointed to, which is that creating an environment where people have a sense of autonomy and a sense of connection are two things that are really crucial to the success of a team and their performance. So it doesn't surprise me that he didn't appreciate being micromanaged, that he wanted to have, even if he had to do it in the middle of the night, he wanted to find space where he was empowered to do his job with a sense of freedom and a sense of autonomy. There have been multiple studies done of all different kinds of teams and all different kinds of situations in which they explored what were the elements of the environment that created the most high-performing team, and what did the leaders do to make that possible. And at the end of the day, there were really core elements of creating a sense of community, a sense of relatedness, a sense of social cohesion, and a sense of autonomy. So it's almost a little bit of an interesting paradox that as a leader, you want to create an environment where people feel like they're connected to each other. They feel a sense of inclusion and belonging, but they also want to be left alone and have a sense of autonomy in their role, which is sometimes challenging for leaders. But if you can get clear on how the science underpins those capabilities, and then maybe have a coach or do some practices that help develop that and get feedback from your team, the chances of being more successful, having really great innovations and really high performance, great results are just incredibly elevated.
Wow. Fabulous. And you and I are going to be presenting together in February at the Training Magazine's Training 2021 Conference and Expo in Orlando. And our session is called Be Fierce with Your Grip. And it's two science-based frameworks for coaching high-performing teams. Mine is grip, yours is fear. So would you tell our listeners a little bit more about your fierce methodology?
Well, yeah, I can sum it up very briefly because it does go into quite a lot with 6 different dimensions. But basically, what I set out to do in my research before writing this book was to look at what are the areas that executive coaching and coaches in all different areas, all different domains are focused on in today's world. And the result was basically a summary of 6 different domains: decision-making, communicating effectively, emotional agility, authenticity, collaboration, and engagement. And so what I did is I took apart each of those domains where we all do a lot of coaching, and I looked at best practices. I looked at when you're trying to elevate and develop your leaders, all different types across a spectrum from alpha to beta and back, which means, from the authoritative to the more collaborative, participative, and back. What are the things that they need to learn? What are the practices that the science demonstrates really work to develop skills in all 6 of those areas? So, the model FIERCE is based on those 6 different dimensions of what I would call effective or the most successful leaders practice today.
So again, that's a great way to remind yourself is to really be fierce, right, whenever you're being a leader. Now, I talk a lot on my show about the power of mindset and reframing. How do you use this practice in your own life? And how do you see it making a difference in coaching clients?
Well, I think you're absolutely right. Reframing and recognizing at the end of the day, there's more than one way to operate. There's more than one way to show up. So, what we're looking to do is, and I know you have this in your portfolio and your focus as a coach, is to help our clients develop a learning or a growth mindset, which what that basically means is to be willing to step back and reflect on the ways you operate, and consider looking at options to expand your portfolio. So not to be self-critical or to necessarily fundamentally change who you are, but just to expand the repertoire. So in all 6 of the dimensions of my fierce model, we're not looking to really change your personality. We're just looking for you to get a sense of what you do well, what are your strengths, what are your natural habits and patterns, and then to expand or reframe and look for opportunities to do more. So ultimately, at the end of the day, just like becoming a better athlete or becoming a better artist or becoming, in this case, a better leader, the key is to not be stuck in a one-way road, right? To be willing to step back, reflect, and expand your portfolio. So that's, to my mind, the key to success.
Wow. Wonderful takeaway. Jeffrey, we have to take another break. Would you hang in there with us for a couple more questions?
Sure.
And anyone who wants to call, 508-222-1320. We'll be right back. And welcome back to Get a Grip with Coach Elix. I'm having a wonderful conversation with Dr. Jeffrey Hall, author of Flex, The Art and Science of Leadership in a Changing World. And Jeff, thank you for being with us. I'm telling you, you and I spend, considerable amount of time together because, I'm a fellow with the Institute of Coaching, and you're one of the leaders with the Institute. But today's conversation has been super, super insightful so far. Thank you for sharing so much with us. I am curious, though, how has your own leadership style changed over the years?
I love that question. There's nothing like walking your own talk, right? So you're reminding me when I, earlier in my career, was the director of human resources at a major consulting firm in New York, and I had my annual performance review. I was told by my boss and by my colleagues through feedback that I had a tendency to come on strong and be a bit overzealous. They thought it was great to be passionate, but they were like, sometimes you need to tone it down, Jeff. You need to learn to step back. And I was like, wow, really? I'm zealous? I didn't realize that. Well, the reality is all you have to do is ask people that know me well, and they will say, well, you do have a strong personality. And it's like, yes, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just that at that time, many years ago, I wasn't aware necessarily of the impact that I always had in group situations. So, I did. I learned to be quieter. I learned to be a better listener. I learned to wait a little bit before I jumped in and added a few things of my own opinion. And it's actually made me a much better coach. It's made me a much better colleague. And that doesn't mean that I can't still be filled with enthusiasm and potentially very passionate and opinionated at times. But I really think, to your point, Elix, we all need to learn our strengths, and then we need to learn how we can grow. So I'm no different from anyone else in that regard.
And I think you're pointing out, that's a function of being emotional intelligent, like really
Right.
knowing how to, recognize, have that self-awareness and how to regulate that self-awareness.
Right.
That's really wonderful. Do you consider yourself an agile leader?
I try to be. I mean, I think that there's the answer to the question would be yes, and I'm constantly growing and learning. I'm not perfect, and I sometimes stumble like everyone else. But the key to developing agility is to see your stumbles and your mistakes as learning opportunities. And I would say that to anyone that's listening. There's no such thing as failure. Everything we do that works is great and should be celebrated. But everything we do that doesn't work should also be considered important and valuable, and not something that we get down on ourselves about. That's one of the things in our culture that keeps people from being the leader that they can be, is they try to start their own business, and the first time around it doesn't work. Well, guess what? I think Steve Jobs started like 4 companies before he finally got together with Steve Wozniak to set up Apple. So, I mean, you just have to learn from the failures and the mistakes and bounce back, be resilient, and keep going. And that's actually how you develop real agility. So, I would say I'm agile, but I'm also still on the journey like everyone else.
That reminds me of that saying, what other people think of you is none of your business. Like, just continue to honor who you are no matter what. And, and learn from mistakes and keep pushing. I often talk about sports analogies in my coaching all the time. And I tell people it's like playing baseball, for example. In baseball, you have to have strikes. That doesn't mean if you get a strike, you don't stop playing. You just go at it again. You try it again, because ultimately you're going to end up with a home run or even a grand slam. So that's a wonderful way to frame that. And this is an age-old question, right? Are leaders born or made?
Both.
Wow, I'm actually surprised by that answer. Why?
Because I think every single human being on the planet is a leader, and every single person on the planet is born. So when you're born, you're a leader, and to be an effective, successful, capable, high-performing leader, you need to grow and learn and develop. So yes, everyone is born a leader, but not everyone fulfills their potential as a leader. So that's why I would say it's a both and to your question.
Wow. That's pretty insightful. And I'm going to be honest, I was not expecting that, because if somebody asked me that question, I would have said they're made. Leadership, you have the ability to learn leadership, but I totally agree with you. So it's a wonderful answer. Jeff, how do people, if anyone wants to follow you anyone is interested in getting your book, if anyone wants to have a follow-up conversation with you, how do people find you?
The easiest way is through my website, Jeffrey Hull, JEFFREYHULL.com, because they can write to me through that website. They can find access to the book, and they can get links to my Facebook and LinkedIn, Instagram. All of that is available through my website.
Fabulous. And again, jeffreyhull.com. Jeffrey's book, Flex, the Art and Science of Leadership in a Changing World. And Jeff, thank you so much for your time, for your attention. You gave it generously, and I'm not surprised because I'm lucky enough to be part of your inner circle. So thank you for being here, and hopefully you'll accept an invitation to come back at some point in the future.
Oh, my pleasure. It's always great to be with you, to see how you're growing as a leader and as a coach, and to bring our message of possibility and potential to the world. So kudos. Keep it up.
Kudos, and Jeffrey and I will be together on February at the Training 2021 Conference and Expo in Orlando, and our talk is going to be about Be Fierce with Your Grip, 2 science-based frameworks for coaching high-performing teams. So you don't only get one of us, you get 2 of us. So that alone is, worth the price of admission. Thank you, Jeffrey. Thank you for being with us.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. And we're coming to almost an end of the show. How is that for you guys? I saw you guys, really noticed that you thought that this was really powerful and insightful.
Yeah, very much. I've had different bosses with different styles. I've had here's your work, do it, and as long as it gets done by the end of the shift, I don't care how you do it, which I love because I just go off and do what I like to do. I've had the ones that have stood over my shoulder every second. Do this, do that, do that. And then I've had the ones who take credit when you do something well and the end product comes out well. I had bosses who said, they took the credit for it. Everybody forgot about me, and that's the type of boss I tend not to like to really work for because, I'm one of those, give me a little encouragement and
and again, that's why he talks about having the agility to dance, with the different circumstances and situations. Now, a couple of reminders. 2 weeks ago, we're on our 14th day of our gratitude challenge. I challenge you all to practice gratitude for 30 days, so that you can see life-altering changes in your life. I'm really curious to see how you're doing, how you're practicing gratitude. What are you doing every day to remind yourself as to what to be grateful for? So continue to follow me on social media for a lot more about that. Next week, because we weren't here for 2 weeks, so next week I have another guest, and Donna Carlin. Donna is a global leadership coach, consultant. She is a force to be reckoned with. You do not want to miss Donna. She lives in Canada, but she works with clients from all over the world. She is well known in the TED world. So for anyone who has ever had any aspirations about how to do a TED Talk, that's a show you want to listen. And she's a force to be reckoned with, and she's going to talk about how to rewrite your own story. So again, that's next Friday. You do not want to miss that. And of course, we're going to be here Wednesday for Steven's show and
Through the Static.
Through the Static on Wednesdays at 5. And then before that, Mr. Mark, our producer, has his own show, and that is
March 1320 Jukebox. And Wednesday, our topic will be Halloween Spooktacular.
Oh, yeah.
So all the great songs about Halloween and ghosts and goblins and, all the things musical with Halloween related.
Yeah, and I think there'll be plenty of surprises when you watch Steven's show on Wednesday. So I highly recommend you tune in. You follow us next Wednesday at 1. And again,
5.
You can... excuse me, at 5. Thank you. Thank you. I'm thinking about my own show. And again, you can follow me at Coach Elix on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube. How about you, Steven? Where can people find you?
Steven the Medium.
Steven the Medium, anywhere. And you, Mark?
I'm here.
You can follow Mark at WARA. So again, thank you everyone for joining us. It's been a fabulous show, and I appreciate your time and your attention. See you next week.